Okay, so you guys, she gave away my next punchline, but you might be wondering, like, how is education in Denali related to landslides? And there are lots of ways, but let's just take that energy and put it right over here, because the reality is that Denny is the geologist, I'm the education coordinator, and we're married. And we both wanted to talk to you guys this summer, but because of our two small children, we are short on time, so we're splitting the hour, and that's the connection. So I'm going to start off talking to you guys for about 15 minutes about some of the educational programs we're doing down in Denali, and then Denny's going to take it over, and hopefully the boys will stay outside for the entirety of that time. So again, my name is Sierra McLane, and I love how my title kind of morphed into kind of like the Park Service Director of the Murie Science and Learning Center. I had this moment of glory, like people pointing out, hey, they're calling you the Park Service Director. Well, I think that I would do some things differently if I were the director, but I am not the director of the Park Service, just of the Murie Science and Learning Center in Denali. So who here has been to the Murie Science and Learning Center? Awesome, fantastic. And here we are in the Murie building, so many wonderful connections. Who among you has participated in a program, an educational program, through the Murie Science and Learning Center? What program did you guys, what was the title?
Ken was
I was a leader on several of the summer. I did programs on doll sheep, on predators and prey.
Awesome.
Photography. So.
Thank you. I appreciate that. Who else? Yeah.
Well, I did the birding migration, and then I'm doing the one that ended next week on the climate in the park.
Oh, fantastic. Yeah, did you raise your hand?
It's been a while.
Yeah.
It was animal tracking.
Yeah.
And plant ID.
Yeah. So these all are field courses, and that might be what this crowd is most familiar with. Anybody familiar with a youth camp or something like that instead, that you've had a child, grandchild participate in? Okay, well, I'm gonna open that door wide open to you guys and tell you a little bit more about what it is that we do in Denali when it comes to education, because it's actually pretty awesome what we do. And pretty diverse. And so first, I'm going to take you through some slides with I'm not going to tell you about them, I'm just going to show you some of the faces of education in Denali today. And you can see whether you think that those faces look familiar. Does it look like who we have in this room, or does it look different? And then we'll unpack the different parts of Denali education by going through the course of the year. So first, a few eye candy slides. That's a permafrost probe, in case you don't know. And a very highly sophisticated quadrant there. Radio telemetry. Scat surveying.
Yeah, what each class is.
I'll tell you a little bit more about them in a minute, yeah. I'm just gonna see if you guys are surprised by what you see. This is distance learning. That's me, with a group last year. Cold water. This kid is not injured. He's just being the one to teach everybody else how to carry a litter. All right, so we have 4 main goals in Denali for our education programs. Number 1, inspire Alaskan kids. We want to inspire everyone. We in particular want to inspire Alaskans, but we really in particular want to inspire Alaskan kids, because they're our next generation of park stewards. Reach new and underserved audiences. Who saw some faces in those slides that maybe surprised you a little bit? Didn't necessarily look like your typical demographic that you'd see on a bus trip into the park. I'll tell you more about that. do more through partnerships. It was a little subtle, but there were different logos. It wasn't just Park Service educators that you were seeing in those photos, and almost everything that we do in Denali, we do in partnership with Alaska Geographic in particular, and other nonprofits and educational institutions such as UAF, Denali Education Center, and then all of the school districts in the state. And then the overall goal to create the next generation of park stewards. So now I'm going to show you many of those pictures again, and I'm going to unpack them a little bit and tell you kind of season by season what it is we're up to and what our underlying goal is for various among these programs. So we can start in the upper left with youth expeditions. So this is backcountry expeditions. They're usually 5 or 6 days long. They're getting kids out there backpacking, camping, using stoves, sleeping in tents. This summer, if you see numbers in parentheses, that's the number of programs, not the number of participants, but the number of programs per summer. So we have 6 of these week-long programs happening this summer. 2 of them are open enrollment, so anyone can sign up. 4 are targeted at youth demographics that you might not otherwise see in Denali independently. So last week, for example, we had a group of first-generation Alaskans, mostly refugees from Africa who now have relocated with their families into Anchorage, and we brought them to the park for there was a second year of partnering with Catholic Social Services in Anchorage and with Denali Education Center in Denali to bring those students to the park. Very clearly a group that you would not usually see in the park on their own. The science camps and field courses. So the field courses, we had a bunch of hands up. Those are our traditional, generally 3-day, 2-night programs on subjects such as Dall sheep or mushrooms or migratory birds. And those are open to you. You are wonderful participants in those programs. And those are some of our most beloved long-term programs. In addition to that, we've developed a lot of science camps in the recent past. Discovery Camp, where kids, mostly local kids, come for a week and just get to play all kinds of games and explore Denali. And then more recently, a program called Denali Summer Science Academy, where we bring students in who, again, none of it is open enrollment. It's 5 programs this summer, all aimed at demographics who otherwise would be unlikely to come to Denali on their own. Many of them are Alaska Native. We partner with Alaska Native corporations or tribal groups. Cook Inlet Tribal Council is coming tomorrow for 4 days, so they come and bring their students to participate in these science programs. And yes, he's holding Snowshoe Hare Scat. That's a survey, a citizen science program that where you take all of this hare scat out of a plot, and then the next year you come back and you take it all out again and you count it each time, and that's how you get a survey of how many hares have come through that plot since then. The Junior Ranger Program, have any of you become Junior Rangers before in national parks or have kids, grandkids? Yeah, totally fun program. We give out about 15,000 books a summer, and that's through our visitor centers. That's highly popular as always. And then new this year is Family Hours at the Murie Science and Learning Center. So the MSLC has been open during the summer for many years, but we refocused that energy for the first time this year into a specific focus on families. And so that's from 1 to 3 p.m. daily with a program, what's it called? A formal program at 1:30 for about 20 minutes. So I encourage all of you to come down and check that out. So that's what we're up to in the summertime. Again, we couldn't do most of these programs without working in partnership with Alaska Geographic and other nonprofits. Into the fall, we get into our season of welcoming school groups to Denali. We have 2 ways to do that. One is the intensives program, which is for local high school students, and the other is Denali Science School. Does anybody here have kids or grandkids in Pearl Creek or Watershed schools from Fairbanks? Okay, so those are a couple of the schools that participate regularly. So Denali Science School is a program where we bring 5th and 6th grade classes, like one class with their teacher and a few parents, chaperones, to the park for 3 days and 2 nights, and we immerse them into science learning. And we house them. They provide their own transportation, but otherwise the program is free to the participants. So pretty amazing thing that we get to do. That's every September. In the winter, it all gets a lot quieter because it's harder to travel. Kids are in school. You guys know well, the curtain kind of closes on visitation for many. And so we go video conference, and we provide distance learning programs to schools across the country. They're an hour long, and they are on topics like the science of sled dogs, or Denali, the high one, which is about geology, dinosaurs in Denali, Ask an Alaskan. So we offer these programs for free to any school anywhere in the country, including Alaska, that wants to sign up. And that's mostly targeted at K through 6. And we offer, over 200 of those programs every winter. And then spring, we go into schools, and you can see there, Ranger Rachel works for me. She's awesome. There she is with some kids doing an activity. And she goes into schools. She does dozens of programs. In 2 weeks, she packs in dozens of programs in Denali Borough and Matsu Borough, going into classrooms and teaching about various topics that are related to Denali. And then we welcome those schools, and any schools, to come and visit Denali as well. Typically as an end-of-year field trip is what they do. And then one more piece to add to this puzzle is that we're really proud at the Murie Science and Learning Center to have the ability to offer grant funding to other national parks in Alaska who are not as financially fortunate as we are in Denali, because we are able to charge an entrance fee, and the whole park road being kind of a limited opportunity to get out there allows us to have the funding to give that to parks that don't have the funding. And so we give $50,000 a year away in education grant funds to other any park, any national park in Alaska, or a partner that is working with that national park. So this is a group in in Kotzebue that's doing a small mammals camp. They're learning about small mammals there, and that's one of the many. I think we funded 13 different education programs across the state this year. So that is a miniature snapshot of education in Denali. Did that surprise anybody? Anybody is surprised that we're doing as much as we are, or that it's as diverse as it is? Okay, I'm not surprised that you are surprised. I think it's, we work so hard at just getting it done that we aren't as good at tooting our own horn about it, which is why it's really fun to come and talk to all of you. So if you want to know more, I can definitely ask or answer a couple of questions. But if you want to know more, this is my contact information. You're welcome to send me an email. Give me a call if you'd like to know more about any of these programs. Why don't I take a couple of questions before passing the mic to Denny? Yeah.
When you were talking about local, were you talking about Healy and that
Yeah.
area? So you weren't talking locally Alaska. That was more spread out for you.
Yeah, local has changed a bit for us over time. It used to be that we were, even 8-9 years ago, we were very focused on local, meaning Healy, Cantwell, not even Nenana. We didn't really forge a strong partnership with Nenana until a few years ago. And now our horizons are broader. So we can't, we just don't have enough people, enough staffing capacity to offer all of our programs to all Alaskans, but many of our programs, there are very few now. Really, Discovery Camp is the one that is more popular among locals, and that's largely age-driven, that the participants are in 1st, 2nd, 3rd grade, so you're less likely to get parents or participants coming from Fairbanks or Anchorage, but we're getting more and more. We get, actually, the word is out, like Discovery Camp has been discovered, and we get families coming down from Fairbanks and up from Anchorage and camping at Riley Creek Campground for the week, the parents, and they send their kid off to our camp every day, and they go for their own hikes, which is pretty great. And so, yeah, so local is pretty rare these days that our programs are focused that way. Yeah.
And I would hope the University of Alaska is well tied in and has been responding, because you're getting kids interested all over the state, you know, and they need to be able to respond when they ask the questions.
Right, indeed, yes, absolutely. I hope that we are growing our next generation of Alaska UAF and UAA attendees. I certainly think so. And we also do, yeah, we work directly with some of the programs at the universities to help welcome their students directly as well. But those tend to be more like an afternoon talk or walk or something like that, yeah. Yeah.
So much of Alaska has been vetoed in the last couple of weeks. Are you in jeopardy?
Good question. Thank you for thinking of that. I am so grateful to say not this time. We did get furloughed because of the government shutdown a number of times over the last few years. And, you know, while that is it was awkward and kind of made us feel anxious at the time, it resolved itself. And so while Denny can speak to that more directly. Some of the partnerships that we have, especially in research, have the potential to be swayed by the changes in the funding structure for the university system, but the federal government's funding for Denali and our partnerships that are within Denali with Alaska Geographic and Denali Education Center, which are really the big ones, are not in jeopardy at this time. Yeah, thanks for asking. Yeah. I should probably turn it over to Denny, but maybe I can sneak back in with the children at the end, and we can find where landslides and education really meet.
Good evening, everyone. Well, first, on a personal level, I stand in solidarity with you of the research and education community here. We hope the problem is resolved quickly and we can continue on a relatively normal path into the future. Now, speaking more as a representative of the park, I can say that we feel a very close bond with UAF. Not only our closest university, you understand the problems that we have. When I look out in the audience right now, I see master's students that are working down the park. I see department chairs that partner with us in the park. And this isn't just in geology, this is across the board and all of our sciences that we do in the park. So you are a valued resource to us and many others, although I know it may not feel like it at times. Sometimes with Fairbanks, for many of you being home, the university being home, Denali being our home, it's easy to forget sometimes that for many people, we are way far out on the edge living here, right? We have visitors that come to the park and see that look on their eyes. They feel like they are at the end of the universe, particularly when they get to the end of the road. And I remember some of that feeling when I first started coming to Alaska. And so we really do have a very good and unique perspective living where we do, and that we see some of the changes that other people might not see as quickly here. So for example, the amount of warming that we're experiencing in our area versus most, if not all, the places in the lower 48. Favorite Kurt Vonnegut quote of mine. What's wrong with this picture? Sled dogs and no snow. And so right there where they're facing, the dogs know this is where the trail usually is. So this is the way that we should be going, but there is a problem here. And this was the scene this year, and to me this is the most interesting part here. And that was on March 29th. And that's usually right about the time of the year where we have the most snow down in the park, and I would imagine here as well. It's the first time ever that the park entrance has been snow-free in March. We set the record by 2 weeks this year, the earliest snow-free times. And we experienced these conditions over a wide area of the park. So, this is just one event here. It is notable that it was the second warmest March on record for us in the park, and that's in approaching 100 years of record. It was also the third warmest October in the park as well. Many of you probably remember October and March, how ridiculously warm it was. Let's see, March was 17 degrees above average for the park. That's crazy. For the first time, the park entrance was actually above freezing throughout the entire meteorological fall. Also, very, very unusual for us. Some screen captures that I stole from some presentations webinars that I watched recently. Some of you may be involved with some of these programs through the UAF and USGS partnerships. I know I'm kind of preaching to the choir here in many ways and a little bit on a soapbox, but it is interesting to revisit some of these things, see some of these trends, that not only are we warming, but the rate in which we're warming is also getting quicker. And then the one that actually really stuck with me was this next one. And so you can see right there in the temperature change in our area, we're looking at an 11 degree Fahrenheit temperature change between the climate normals at the end of last century and the climate normals at the end of this century. As a geologist, it really stuck with me that the folks that were presenting this, the climatology folks that were presenting this, said that's the equivalent of going from a glaciation into an interglaciation. Think about that. During some of our lives, at least the younger ones in the audience, we are going to experience this 11 degree temperature change. That's the equivalent in one human lifetime of going from a glaciation into an interglaciation. That's substantial stuff right there. But I'm going to step down off my soapbox for a minute because we got some other problems that we've got in the park and I want to talk about. However, some of those climate conditions are no doubt conditioning some of the challenges that we have in the park. Of particular notice or noteworthiness, I am presenting this information to you. I am partially just a messenger, although not fully the messenger. If there's anything wrong, you're welcome to mentally take some shots at me. But I represent a large group of people that are working on the problems here in the park. And I'll get more into those partnerships, but I'm sharing information that many, many people have helped obtain. So most of you are probably familiar with the park. How many of you have taken a ride on a bus in the park? Wow, that's high numbers. Okay, great. Well, we've got a pretty good idea of what the park geography is like and what the park road is like. And so the green line there is the park boundary. The black line is the park road, and the red line is the park's highway there. And that red asterisk there is right about the midpoint of the park road, so mile 45.4 of the park road. And so that's where we've got this one landslide of particular interest. And so that slide goes by the name of Pretty Rocks, but this area was known as Pretty Rocks well before there was a landslide there. And, it's quite simple. The name is descriptive. They're very pretty rocks. They're tectonic volcanic rocks, 56 million years old, the same kind of rocks that formed Denali, the mountain, that granitic rock, but these rocks those rocks cooled to death. These came up onto the surface and created this vast array of colors to make these rocks very pretty. And it's also in the area known as polychrome overlook. Many of you are probably familiar with that. Stop out there. It's an awesome vista from polychrome overlook there. So this is in 1930. If you look at the bottom of the photo there, you can see it says August of 1930. You can see these folks literally in there with hand tools establishing the road through there. And then a piece of heavy equipment in the background working that. So that equipment is a little bit further to the east, and this hand crew is just a little bit further to the west there, just carving out the area. By 1931, the heavy equipment had kind of turned the corner, starting to get the road established through this area. So what's the problem? We got punched a road through there. It's been stable for 80, 90, 100 years. What could possibly go wrong in an area this deep in volcanic rocks, right? Well, before the 1980s, they were aware that there was some type of landslide here. It required light maintenance every few years, but the road would just drop down slowly, a little bit at a time. You'd bring in the heavy equipment in there, patch it up, no big deal. By the 1980s, they started seeing more substantial movement. And they're like, well, let's see what we can do to slow this thing down. So being from Louisiana myself, I look at the blue and I think Katrina tarp there, but no, in fact, that's geotextile. Stuff is so strong that if you could tack down each end of it, you could drive a bus across it and it could hold it up. So they were trying to at least slow down or improve the road resiliency over that area of the slide. And then here on your right, you'll see they're building some rock gabions because they're trying to protect that area from the rock fall that's up above. Well, that was a nice idea, but the landslide pretty quickly ate that. By the early 2000s, mid to mid 2000s, we're looking at approximately 2 feet of movement per year. And it was kind of like this when I first moved to the park about 8.5 years ago. I had a neighbor that was a heavy equipment operator, and he's like, oh yeah, we get out there and we do get the snow plowed off the road in the spring. We dress it up and it's good for the year. It's like, okay, that makes sense to me. It's been working for you for a long time. Hopefully it'll stay that way. So this is a crack like you maybe would see in the mid-2000s. By 2014, however, the movement had started to pick up. We really noticed that this thing was, the rate of it was increasing. And by the spring of 2018, we started seeing some fairly substantial movement. We had seen enough movement in 2017 that when we went out in 2018, we tried to get out ahead of them and be a little bit more prepared. Instead of letting the heavy equipment plow across this before we were able to do any science, Michael Frothingham, pictured here, and we skied out there and we shoveled this off so we could do some photogrammetry of this site and quantify how much the road had moved over the wintertime. So, our road crew looked at this, they flinched a little bit, but it was still within the realm of like, all right, we got this, it's good. But recognizing that we did have a substantial problem, we went ahead and did some drilling in the landslide that year. And so the background image here, kind of on the right, is LiDAR imagery that we collected last year. Looking at, think about it as it's a digital elevation model, digital terrain model, and it's electronic topographic map, basically. So looking down, straight down the slide here, and you can see those 5 red dots there. So each of those 5 red dots, we drilled a hole in the landslide there, and we installed 3 pieces of instrumentation. 1, a piezometer to get an idea of where the water level was in there. If you do anything with landslides, typically you want to know something about the water there. 2, we put in a inclinometer, so you can see how much those borings might be getting deflected by the landslide movement. And we also put in a thermistor string. So just think about a string of thermometers that went down. From some drilling that happened in 2003, we knew that we did have some permafrost in the landslide, so we wanted to get a better idea of what was the temperature of the ground down there. And this picture here on the left is just to give you an idea what it looks like looking down in one of those boreholes and some of the equipment that was down there. So let's take a look at some of the data that we got out of those. I tried to break this down to make it as simple as possible to move through it pretty quickly. It's a lot of information. And so numbers 1 through 5 here represent these holes. Let me just back up for a second. And this one here is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 going downhill. It's not too important because actually they're all amazingly consistent. What we saw with the inclinometers is that we're looking at about 1 centimeter of horizontal and vertical movement every day. So this thing is moving along pretty darn quick. Think about trying to maintain your driveway if it was moving 1 centimeter or almost half an inch every day. That will require some effort. Inclinometers 1 through 3, we had some fancier instrumentation down there that could take more displacement before they sheared. And so you could see that they actually took up to 35 inches of displacement before those instruments sheared. Each one of those was rather spendy, so it's interesting doing this kind of work because you spend a lot of money knowing that you're going to break it. Numbers 4 and 5, you can see they didn't take as much displacement. Those are traditional inclinometers, and they broke relatively quickly and didn't really provide us that information. However, the rate of movement was relatively consistent. Also in there, what we came across was permafrost. All right, what's permafrost? Frozen ground for how long? Yeah, more than a year, a couple years, right? Yep, frozen ground. Does that tell you anything necessarily about the ice content? No. You can have relatively dry permafrost, or you can have very wet permafrost, exactly. So what we came across was ice-rich permafrost, not just permafrost, but ice-rich at these range of depths, and then that was sitting right on top of where the failure plane was in this. And so we saw that movement. It wasn't kind of like spread out over a wide area like this. It was moving as a block. So right at the bottom, all the movement was occurring like this across all 5 boreholes.
What months did you say this video was?
This was put in August. Late July and August is when the instrumentation started being put in.
How deep were the boreholes?
Up to 120 feet, and there was permafrost all the way down past the bottom of those, which surprised us. Keep in mind, this is a south-facing rocky slope, not where I personally would have thought of having permafrost at first, but we've been learning.
How deep does it start?
So it starts as the permafrost starts as shallow as several feet down, a couple meters down. But then the ice-rich permafrost tends to be a little bit deeper, and I'll show you an image that'll get to that a little bit better. Just kind of give you an idea what I'm talking about when I say ice-rich. I'm talking about up to 75% ice, including directly underneath the road, directly. They drilled in the road. In fact, this is Pretty Rocks 1801. That's from underneath the road.
What size boreholes were you putting in?
I'm trying to remember. It must have been like a couple inches. Here's another. That's 03, so that's just below the road. So it's a little bit, depending on what interval you're sampling there, it's anywhere from 100% if you look at a relatively small section, or if you look at over a meter section or so, we were seeing up to 75% permafrost. So yeah, lots of ice underneath the ground there. Works out nicely that you've already met my beautiful wife and heard my kids, even if you didn't see them. So that's Sierra and Cedar sitting on the fault scarp, or the landslide scarp, excuse me, on the eastern side of the landslide, last September 29th. 14 days before this picture was taken, they had just graded the road. So the road was perfectly smooth across there, and so that's the amount of cracking that had happened in 14 days. Well, I took that picture because a new crack was forming there. I wasn't really thinking about the next picture. It's not a perfect repeat, but I think you'll get the point of seeing the change that happened between September 29th and the change that happened to March 22nd. And so again, we worked with our road crew, and they actually plowed snow just 1 lane wide out there for us so we could drive instead of having to ski and bring all of our gear this time up to the site. And we knew we had quite a bit of displacement. I flew out there during the winter time and downloaded some of the equipment to check it out, so we knew we had some substantial movement. And we got out there, and this is Britta Schroeder and I, our GIS specialist. We shoveled the snow away from the scarp there so we could do more detailed measurements on that. So that's the eastern side of the landslide, and the center of the road is directly above the GPS staff that she's holding there. And that is a 2-meter tall staff, 6.5 feet. So that's how much it had dropped down between September 14th, 15th, and March 22nd of this year. So you can see between 2008 and 2019, it's sped up, and sped up a lot. We're looking at a doubling of the rate from the previous year. Okay, so this is where the alarm bells start to go off, right? Because this is pretty dramatic. You look at this photo and you think this is a doubling from the previous year. What if it doubles again? Could be game off. And so we've been in a watch and see mode through this year to see how it's going. Here's a little bit of a bigger picture to kind of give you an idea on that. You can see that darker upper layer behind Britta's head here. That's gravel that was brought in from off-site there. And this is some of the native material from that area. So yeah, at this point, just looking at how much it had dropped down over that time period, even without the fancy instrumentation, we know that we're looking at about 8 centimeters or about 3 inches per week at this point. So just coming back to some photogrammetry of the park road, this is just a composite image from a bunch of photos draped over a digital elevation model. This is the landslide itself right here. This is the section of road that's been impacted by the landslide. So originally, a few years ago, this is how we thought of as what the Pretty Rocks landslide consisted of right here. Captures about 90 meters, about 100 yards of the park road, the full width of it. So that's pretty substantial when you've got that much of the road being captured. And you know, we looked down here and we saw these lobes down here. And we're like, okay, there's something else that's been going on here in the past. But if you actually come down here and take a look, there's a whole bunch of lichens on this rock. In fact, Zena here, master's student, was just out here quantifying some of these lichens the other day to get a relative age on how long that's been there. This has been sitting here a long time. This one's been sitting here a little bit less time. And this one probably a little bit less. Even a few years ago, we didn't see any cracks or any movement down here. But coming into 2018, we were already kind of like, well, maybe this is where the landslide's moving, because we saw some cracks. Margaret Darrow was actually one of the first people that, like, you know, it's one thing if you see a tundra mat is being cracked open, you know it's had a relative period of stability where it allowed that tundra mat to form. But now we're seeing cracks in it, and so there's disturbance. The landslide was starting to propagate its way further down. And then by the end of last year, we started having some pretty strong suspicions, and then we have confirmed with instruments this year that this is the extent of the landslide now. So we understand that it's moving all the way down to the terminus. So, or toe, depending on which camp you're in here. I try not to anthropomorphize too much. So why this ends up being significant, you might be, why would you care what's going on down here at the bottom? Well, if you just got this little one happening up here at the top, you can build a buttress down here at the bottom, do something to kind of help hold it back. Whereas if that whole thing is moving like that, it introduces more problems for us there. Fortunately, we had a science illustrator that was working in the park this spring, and we thought, well, it'd be a really great idea to turn her loose on this. So we geologists had, particularly the Federal Highways geologists, had helped build a cross-section for the slide based on the data that we were getting out of the boreholes. And we had a science illustrator that worked with us to help illustrate the processes that are going on here, at least the conditions that we've been able to ascertain here from the boreholes. So the difference between the original road alignment here depicted in red and where it's depicted in here with the bus is exaggerated a little bit for artistic effect. However, you'll see here in a photo I'll share with you shortly that really not that much. If we take a look at, kind of zoom in here and look at this box here, here's a representation of the road. And this top brown part here is either the active layer, which is thawing yearly. This is seasonal frost that comes out and thaws, and or a tail lake, an area around permafrost that's not freezing every year. And then you get down into this material down below where we've got relatively ice poor permafrost in this kind of stippled area here, into the ice-rich permafrost a little bit deeper, right there sitting on top of the interface between the sediment from above and the bedrock down below. Now I'm going to kind of put bedrock in quotes here. This bedrock is a hard rock geologist would want to fight me in calling it bedrock, and I'll show you why here in a second. Here we go. So volcanic rock is not known as the best stuff to build infrastructure on. Keep that in mind if you ever want to build a house somewhere. Stay off that stuff if you can. Not particularly solid stuff, but here's one of our staff members, Nikita. We had never seen this part of the bedrock being exposed right there in front of him. The talus had built up there and we'd never gotten to see it, but because it's moving so fast now, it actually uncovered some bedrock that, as far as I know, in the park's history, we've never been able to see. So take note of particularly this area right here. I'm going to zoom in with the next photo. Give you a look at that. It's interesting, some folks from our road crew were like, hey, we found some coal in there and we put it in our barbecue pit to try to like crank up our dinner a little bit. Well, it didn't burn. Not too surprisingly for the geologist in the room at least. And this other material here, we walked up and took a look at that, the kind of that more yellowish kind of buff colored material. When that stuff is wet, now keep in mind this is the bedrock here, you can stick your finger into it. And so that's what the road is founded on, is in this stuff. That's again, the quotes around bedrock. 56 million years that stuff's been sitting there, but not for long. All right, so let's jump forward to 2019 and what we know. We recognize we've got really quite a severe problem here in the park. So we're trying to step it up to the next level, provide the appropriate level of safety for our visitors, safety for our staff members, and also road resilience, right? The road is quite important for the regional economy. I'll talk about that a little bit more in a moment. So we're working with Trimble and some other companies. We're going to get an automated total station set up in Pretty Rocks. That's the total station there, the yellow part, and those little prisms there. I meant to bring one with me, but they're only about this big around. We're going to scatter 30, 40, 50 of those around the landslide, and this can measure down to 1-2 millimeter accuracy, precision. Here we can tell how the slide is moving in a lot of detail, and actually use satellite telemetry to share this data out near real time. So if the slide starts to pick up speed, we can know and get people on the ground there to be evaluating the situation and potentially close the road if we need to. We're also putting a time-lapse camera out there on site to hopefully create some really nifty movies this winter to show the movement. And we're also going to have a basic meteorological station out there, rain, wind, temperature, to get an idea, see if we can have any correlations between the amount of movement that's occurring in the landslide and the meteorological conditions. And we're also doing photogrammetry out of the site. Just this last spring, I became a commercial pilot for UAVs and then got certified through the Department of Interior to fly them in parks. If you go down there as a visitor, you can't fly UAVs in the park. Don't say, Denny told me, like you can do it. It's only under special circumstances, and typically we try to keep it out of the visitors' space, and so they're not seeing or being bothered by them when we possibly can. Okay, so there's the problem. So what are you going to do about it? Is what the park managers want to know, is what our congressional staffers want to know. Senator Murkowski, I think, has got a pretty good elevator speech on this. She can talk it pretty well. So first and foremost, we're using active adaptive management on our existing alignment. That's kind of a fancy way of saying we're learning from our mistakes. But it's putting it positively, right? There's a few interesting things about this photo. This was taken this spring, 2019, before the road was open to the public. You can see this is the geology truck there, and nice level road right across there. Well, what's this thing down here? Yep, that's the road last year. And so just to kind of give you an idea, now it didn't actually drop down quite that much last year. It wasn't perfectly level across there in 2018. However, it does give you an idea of the magnitude of this landslide nonetheless. So for example, one thing that we learned in this last year, we didn't purposefully do this necessarily, but we were initially just trying to keep a lot of weight off the landslide, right? All these rocks weigh a lot. The more driving force you have in a landslide, the more that thing is going to tend to move and slide down. So initially we were trying to keep as much new material, we were trying to minimize the amount of material that we brought from outside the landslide into it. Well, Federal Highways did some modeling and they were able to see, well, it's really not that sensitive to weight. And so we've started having a little bit of a different management plan with that. So now we're just filling it and trying to keep it passable and as safe as possible through that area. All right, talk about the range of options. Just take a moment here to get you oriented to this image. And so this is a multi-directional hill shade from the LiDAR data this is from a satellite or an airplane flew over and did interferometric synthetic aperture radar. Created a multi-directional hill shade for this. It's fancy speak for a digital topographic map. Since most of you are familiar with the park, this right here at mile 43 is the East Fork Bridge. Anybody know anything about the cabin that's right here? It's often known as the Murie cabin, right? And that's because the Murie family spent a lot of time there studying wildlife biology, right? Fun tie-in. This starts up the grade, up Polychrome, and right here is the Pretty Rocks landslide here. Then right about here at mile 46 is the Polychrome overlook. And so that's where all westbound buses stop and let people get off and enjoy it there when the weather's not too bad. Often windy there, but a beautiful, beautiful place to see the geology and also just enjoy the park.
How far is that, another half mile past your 45?
Yeah, about a half mile. So what are we going to do? Well, the simplest thing would be to just sit back and wait and see what happens. And then the road would eventually or possibly not be passable anymore. And so at that point, we might want to, go ahead and create a turnaround area for the buses at mile 43 here. That could be the end of the road. That would be difficult for a few different reasons, one of which our most popular tour, the TWT, or the Tundra Wilderness Tour, goes past this area. So our visitors, including many of you, would not get to enjoy many of the iconic vistas that we have beyond this area. So this is not something that we're pursuing, but nonetheless it's on the table of options, partially depending on what nature serves us up. We also have a proposed north reroute corridor. The road might be moved, starting over there about the East Fork Bridge, go around the backside of Polychrome and come in down here to lower topography terrain right here about mile 47 and a half there. One of the problems with this is it'd probably take a few 100,000 to a few million cubic yards of gravel. And we don't have those kind of resources identified out in the park. That is a lot of gravel. And it would take a long time, take a lot of effort, and we'd still be going through the same problematic volcanic rocks in this area. So we'd probably be trading known problems for some unknown problems. So we're probably going to rule this out later this summer. Then we also have the potential to go through the south reroute corridor. The Muries, they're careful about having their name attached to things. They weren't real big ones on particularly wilderness things, having their name attached to it. You got to respect them for that. However, does anyone know what this area in green is called down here? The Plains of Murie. No, that's unofficial, but that's generally speaking, if you're referring to that area, you can refer to it as the Plains of Murie and people know it. Really don't want to put a road through the Plains of Murie. However, it's something we have to consider. It could be that or no experience in the park beyond mile 43. So we are looking into the potential of a reroute through this area. What would be one of the good reasons for going this direction? A lot of gravel. It's pretty flat down there, right? Yeah, a lot lower topography. Particularly when you're up there at Polychrome Overlook looking down, like, it'd be easy to get a road down through there. You just get a bulldozer and you kind of push through there and clean that stuff out. Well, most Alaskans look down there like, ooh, that looks like permafrost down there, ice-rich permafrost. You got these big, wide, braided rivers down there as well. So it's easy to kind of be like, just go down there, bulldoze the road, but there's some complexities down there for sure as well. Can we do it? Absolutely. But I think this is going to get into some of the bigger questions as a society we're going to have to be asking ourselves. Is it worth it to us? Also of note, it would be one thing if the Pretty Rocks landslide was the only one in this section. It is most definitely not. It is one of 4 landslides along the section of the road that is blocked, has taken out part or all the park road or has a high potential to take out road. We got one here called the Bear Cave landslide that might take out twice as much as the park road as Pretty Rocks one day. Perlite landslide came down, I think it was 2015 or 2016, blocked half the park road for the several hours. And even one at Polychrome Overlook that first started happening in 2002. What happened in November of 2002? Earthquake, big one. I have to check with Mike West, our earthquake specialist here from UAF. Prior to the most recent earthquakes down in California, he had a notable thing. He said that 2002 earthquake, that 7.9 magnitude earthquake, released more energy than all earthquakes in the lower 48 states combined over the previous 30 years. Think about that a little bit. A lot of people died, right? Nope, because it's Alaska. There's no one really that close. Not that much infrastructure. However, that landslide did shake down, that earthquake did shake down the landslide there at the overlook. So that had to be rebuilt in there. And we've actually just started having problems with that again this year. So in composite, here are some of the reroutes we're looking at. And really what I'm stacking up here is some of the least desirable ones first, moving down into the more desirable or more reasonable options that we could come up with. Rather than getting all this reroute business or having people turn around at mile 43, what we really want to do is improve the existing roads resiliency. Make it to where we have less of these that impact the park road. When they do, we can hopefully bounce back from them more quickly. It's a little bit of an inside joke. I see a couple Denali folks back there. I usually try to wait and just kind of look serious and see what kind of response I get on this. My in-laws did bring my oldest son here this last year, so it got me to thinking about it. This is that's taking into account for climate change and changes in visitation. This is the new Isles and Visitor Center back here. I don't know what it is about monorail, but it always comes up in every discussion, so I got to at least put it out there. Yeah, right, that's right. We've proposed, a tunnel has been proposed. So maybe we could shoot off of where Bear Cave landslide is right here. Just avoid this landslide, and this landslide. Just go behind it. It's easy, right? You just poke a tunnel through there. The rock's not that great for tunneling. There's this problem with ice that we have here in Alaska. Probably have to have some boring machine to clean out the ice. You gotta have lights, you gotta have ventilation, you gotta have all this stuff. Yeah, it's probably not gonna happen. One of the other things you can do is just hold down the landslide, right? If that thing's moving, you get in there with some equipment, you build some things, you hold that thing down. We do that in lots of places. Probably not gonna happen here. Think about something moving a centimeter a day or faster and trying to get out there in it and build something to stop it. Difficult. Probably not gonna happen. Now, when I first started working with landslides in the park, it was interesting. We worked closely with the state DOT. We brought them in, let them see some of our problems. Like, okay, what would you do if you were faced with this problem? Like, we get a D8 up there, and if it's coming down, we'd take it down, slap your hands, done. And that is actually something that we're looking at here. Whatever material is coming down and causing problems for us on the road, you get some heavy equipment or blasting up there, you bring it down. You get it down below the road to where it's no longer a problem. It's not something we typically do in national parks, particularly in wilderness, which you only have to get 150 feet off the center line of the road before you get into federally designated wilderness along this section of road. However, blasting is considered historic and therefore acceptable in wilderness. I'm not kidding. I'm not kidding. D8s aren't. That's kind of like planes are, helicopters aren't. Got to draw the line somewhere, I guess. The biggest problem with taking it down is we're looking at, again, at least several 100,000 cubic yards of material or possibly several million cubic yards of material. It would completely reshape the whole mountain front here to do that, and it would be very difficult to do that while the park road is open. Think about that. And think about the impacts of closing the park road for a season or possibly even two. We're not talking about chump change here. So this is certainly one of the possibilities we're still looking at. Hopefully we don't have to get to this point, but nonetheless. And right now, believe it or not, the most likely option looks like bridge it. What happens when a bull's charging at you? You don't like square your shoulders right and like jump right into the thing and try to knock it down. You like hold your, I don't know what their red thing is called there, and Toro, and just let it come right on by. Well, so bridges can be useful like that. You just get it up, the bridge up out of the way, let the landslide go directly underneath you. Well, the problem is we've got these volcanic rocks still. You got to put bridge abutments in, right? Try to build something. The park road has been nominated for the National Register of Historic Places. It's considered a cultural resource and the viewscapes that you experience along there. And so that is protected very, very carefully. So we can't be putting the Golden Gate Bridge style bridge in here. Cultural folks are like, nope, not going to happen. So what we're looking at the possibility here is using these mostly precast, pre-built bridges. You bring it in, and in one single span, you get across the whole landslide. Now, why is it important to do it in one span? Right, what are the supports going to go in? You don't want to stick one in the landslide, right? So it has to go over the whole landslide. And this is pretty much the limit of what federal highways can build, is about a 300-foot bridge out in this kind of environment that doesn't have any kind of support. So this is a much smaller bridge than you would see at Pretty Rocks if one gets built there, but nonetheless one that federal highways has built in other areas. So that is one option that we're exploring. And if you do go to the park this August or September, you very well may see some drilling happening.
How can you get those spans in? Because I can't imagine something 300 feet long is going to make turns on
I'm not exactly sure, but it'd be some crazy cranes or bring in some military helicopters or something to bring in some of these big pieces. I'm not sure. As a geologist, I kind of sit back and watch the engineers, and thankful I'm not doing the math on that. Another thing to point out, this is part of a broader thing I'm not going to go into very much, but we have this broader plan where we call it the Unstable Slope Management Program, or the USMP. So we try not to get too focused on any one landslide, right? Pretty Rocks is our problem child, our poster child, however you want to put it. I don't know anything about problem children. They don't know to listen about that yet. That's great. Just give them another year and they will. In fact, Pretty Rocks is only one of over 140 unstable slopes along the park road that we've quantified. You can see here just in the polychrome section, I don't know, there's probably 25 or 30 of them right there in that section. Not only do we have a high-ranked landslide problem there at Pretty Rocks, we have a high-ranked rockfall problem with them coming into the landslide, and high-ranked debris flow or mud flow problems there coming in as well. So we have to keep a bigger picture in mind. Bedtime alarm. Perfect, the presenter, you said something like that, Althea, then your phone goes off. All right, so it's bedtime, we gotta wrap this show up. Cost. This is a question that comes back to, a lot of people want to know cost. Our senators want to know the cost. Our management wants to know the cost. It's expensive. Anyone that's a homeowner here, tried to build anything in Alaska, knows it's not simple and it is costly. And I think really in a recent interview when Alaska Public Media person ambushed Senator Murkowski and asked her about the cost, this is what she said. I'll let you read this. Now, just to be clear, well, I don't know this because I didn't talk to her myself, but I don't think what she's saying is we're going to take funding, all the other funding from all the parks and dump it into this one place. I don't think that's what she was saying in this case. She's just trying to put it in perspective that it really is exceptionally expensive because it's a job that's not easily done. However, we could be looking at anything from a few tens of millions of dollars to a few hundreds of millions of dollars. Not a trivial chunk of change. Now, something to keep in mind, though, some folks that are interested in the park, I mean, let's be forthright. Some folks, other Park Service employees kind of poke us in the ribs a little bit and call us the Princess Park. Why is that? Princess Tours, yeah, Princess Cruises, right? We get a lot of visitors from there. We've got industrial tourism in the park. Also, because like Princess, you know, we think we're so great there in Denali because we get all these visitors and feel all important, you know, because of that. In the meantime, we've got these huge, beautiful wilderness areas, other parks that get very little visitation and aren't really appreciated that much. However, with this industrial tourism does come, with that comes some very important things about the economy. So a study was done by the USGS in 2017, and Denali National Park creates $932 million in economic output. That's almost $1 billion of an economic output per year. Over 8,000 jobs are tied to visitation in the park. So that starts making a few tens of millions of dollars or maybe even a few $100 million seem something that might be a little bit more reasonable there. So we're still working on this. We're working on some conceptual designs. We got to narrow it down. Are we going to build a bridge there? Can we build a bridge there? If we are, how much is that going to cost? How much is it going to help cost to reduce the risk of some of these other landslides? So in summary, yes, we have a substantial problem. That photo that we took out there this spring is really jolting to a lot of folks. It certainly was to us. We expected and are prepared for greater maintenance, and we're having to do more maintenance in the park now. They're just getting ramped up to be closing the road at night for a while probably to do some maintenance in there, get it more level across there because there's only so much of a swale the buses can take before they can still get through there safely. We have increased our monitoring substantially. Some of our team is out there every few days, and we hope to have a near real-time monitoring system in there, monitoring it 24/7 through the visitor season. So we're really focused on a range of positive solutions for this area. We can come up with a solution, and we will, using adaptive management, learning from our mistakes. We have prepared plans for an emergency egress should the landslide go quickly. If we were to have a 7.9 magnitude earthquake in the park right now, that's where my mind is going to go, is to Pretty Rocks at that moment and be looking for the nearest airplane to go out there to go check it out and see if it's still there. Emergency egress, in this case, one way, just get the buses and the people out of the park is all that would be used for. We're also looking at the potential for these long-term reroutes. We'd rather not do it because it would go against like our cultural heritage that we have there in the park. It would get into 5 miles of federally designated wilderness. It would get into critical wildlife areas that the Murie family there studied back through time. So with that, for the latest, please feel free to go out and search Pretty Rocks Landslide. We try to keep the website updated with some of our latest happenings, including reports to Congress. We are now working on the draft of our second report to Congress, and we have to submit that every 90 days until we get our arms around this problem. So I'm not going to go through this whole list, but as I said, I'm partially just a presenter here, standing on the shoulders of all divisions of Denali National Park, up through to the national level of the National Park Service, Department of Interior, Federal Highways, USGS, several different research institutions, even the Army Corps of Engineers has helped us out down there, and many, many more, too many to list here, but we really are having some great collaboration. Questions?
So the truck that slid down, do you know why it slid down, and then also how'd you get it out of there?
Anybody hear about the truck that went down off the road this year? So just before you get to Pretty Rocks, a couple turns before, one of our employees went airborne off of Polychrome area, and when I heard that, I didn't want to hear any more because like, well, that's certainly a fatality, right? Somehow I managed to keep the vehicle up, and it came to rest about, what was it, about 300 feet down the slope, and he was unhurt, self-rescued, walked back up to the top. Yeah, it was a minor miracle. It's really, truly unbelievable when you could see where the vehicle went off. And they had to get a professional recovery folks in there to get the vehicle out, and then helicopter to get some of the remaining material out. It was so steep, so treacherous getting down there, and he still works in the park. Very thankful fellow.
Does he still drive?
No.
I was in the park in mid-June, and on the way out, we were all the way out to Camp Denali, and on the way out, I noticed this section that's sloughing. And as we came around, you could see the cross-section of it. It looked to me like there was some cabling or something there.
Mm-hmm.
What's being done? I mean, I've never seen it before, and it just struck me like, that's an indicator something's serious going on here.
Exactly. He saw some cabling when he drove through, passed through that area on a bus, going out to the west end of the park road. And yeah, that cabling was some of the monitoring equipment from these boreholes. And so those cables came up out of the boreholes and went to a place where the data was stored, and then eventually telemetered via satellite out so we could monitor it remotely. And now all that's been removed because all that equipment has been sheared. It's useless now.
Can you tie with the acceleration that's happening there, or what you're projecting to climate change, and not just the melting of the permafrost, but changing precipitation patterns and how that might create mass wasting events in that area?
Yeah, again, leaning on our UAF collaborators here, we've learned through some of the climate modeling that we're probably looking at increased precipitation amounts and storminess out there in the park. You have a warmer atmosphere, you can hold more moisture in it, right? It's pretty relatively straightforward. So we would expect more kind of rainfalls to cause problems potentially out there for the area. But interestingly, because of warmer temperatures, you're going to have greater evapotranspiration. And so overall, we're going to be faced with the projections are that we're going to be faced with a drier condition, and so be more fire prone, although more higher intensity rainfalls. So it's kind of the worst of all worlds, unless you're like that green slime that grows on top. I love to pick on Sierra because she's got a background in forestry and geologist. We just want to like get all that stuff off the top so we can see underneath.
The lobes up on the Dalton Highway where they rerouted the road north of Wiseman, is there any parallels with what's happening up there with this, or are they different situations?
Well, one of the lead PIs in that project is sitting directly in front of you. So I'm not going to comment too much about that other than to say that when I saw Margaret over there, I said, yeah, I want to go back and read some of the research that you've done there. And we certainly don't have the same exact problem going on there, but it may be somewhere along the continuum. So we're still really trying to get our arms around what is the process that's acting there. So stand by. Hopefully next year I can give you an answer.
Are you talking about on the Yukon Bridge?
No, in this case, I'm not even. I know the Yukon Bridge that you're talking about, but I'm not sure where that is in the universe. But yeah, a different location. What mile are we at up there with the
55.
219 on the Dalton is where these frozen debris lobes are.
North of Cold
It
Foot.
seems to
Near
me
the old Dietrich camp.
the Park Road has been there for 75 years, but it seems like a lot of this has happened in the last 10 years. So surely there must be something around climate change that's inducing this.
So the question is, the road's been there a long time, so why now? It's a little bit of a tricky question that we're trying to get at there, and that there's definitely some observational bias that goes into this. I've got a background in natural hazards and geology. I kind of show up, my wife blamed it on me. Like, you're always around when these bad landslides happen. There's a joke that people always say, yeah, I saw you out there jumping up and down on that thing. I'm pretty light, though. It doesn't really make any difference. We're trying to answer that. When you start looking for something, it's easier to find it. That's one thing that we've learned from, like, even with dinosaur tracks in the park, right? We didn't see dinosaur tracks there for 100 years, and then a UAF geology student found one, and as soon as we saw that one, we started seeing them everywhere. So there's an observational bias that goes in there, but we definitely appear to be having more infrastructure problems. And some of the people that have worked in the park for several decades are telling me things like, the things I used to see once in a decade, I'm seeing once every few weeks now in the park. So I guess I can't say definitively. I have to kind of like fall back as a scientist and say, I'm not sure. I don't know, but it appears that we are seeing more problems now, but we're going to try to be more careful and tease that out in detail.
In the past, have there been various schemes proposed of a loop road going in one side, coming up? Is that here in your alternatives?
Depends on who you're talking to. The park people are typically like, no, I don't know what you mean in the north access road. This has been political football for decades, and there is a proposed loop road that would go in more up from the Healy area out the Stampede corridor and plug in out in Kantishna. That's been proposed for some time and has gotten some traction in past administrations. And in 2003, one of the state offices here did a hazard analysis of that corridor. It's full of permafrost. And quite sensitive permafrost. So yes, that is an option that some people definitely consider, and it has its own serious problems with it as well. So we may one day see it built, because there's this term, it's one of my favorite dorky terms I learned from federal highways. They talk about this thing called network redundancy. Network redundancy. So when the Denali highway is shut down out here on one side, it's kind of a pain when you're coming into town, but whatever, you kind of go on a different road and you make your way through town and you get to where you're going. However, in Denali, we have zero network redundancy. We've got one dead-end road. And so in many ways, having a loop road would be better, because it would provide a different set of different egress. But again, it would have its own severe problems. And by the way, we're kind of going over at this point, so if you want to just get up and walk out, I'll understand.
The Isleson Bluffs project where they fixed up the sloughing area by Isleson Bluffs, is that stayed stable? Is there permafrost under that? Is it gonna slip away again?
So I think you're probably referring to the 2016 slide that we had there. Eielson Visitor Center got the same amount of precipitation in the month of July in 2016 as they typically get annually. There was very wet, 20 inches of rainfall in the month of July. At the park entrance, we get 15 inches water equivalent over the entire year, so that was a lot of rain for us. And that area came unglued, and it was an area that we'd been watching for some time because we'd had some smaller events happen there, and we will probably have some more problems there in the future as well. There's a lot more material that could come down there, so that is one of the sites that we're continuing to monitor. I can neither confirm nor deny that there's permafrost down there. That stuff is pesky, particularly in parks where you can't just like roll out the drill rigs and poke holes in the ground wherever you want to. Our cultural people, man, I tell you, they're tough on me. They're also some of my best friends. But they're like, yeah, you can use a hand auger up to 2 inches to drill all you want, but beyond that, no. The answer is no. So it makes it a little bit tougher for us to go out and drill in some of these areas. We try to do some probing starting about this time of the year to get an idea if we think if there's permafrost there, but if it's beyond our hand probes, it's really hard for us to know. So we suspect that there is, but we don't know for sure. Maybe one more question, and we'll wrap this up. Does that sound about right off the end? Yeah.
Are there other more or less artificial constraints that have maybe written into laws? Like if you reroute the road, do you have to do it to certain road standards? Whereas something more like a Pioneer Road that would be passable might need to be rebuilt periodically, that would be vastly cheaper. Is that off the table?
Yeah, so like the emergency egress route would be much more straighter. It'd probably be down right immediately below the bottom of the cliffs there, kind of down where the water flows. Just make it just passable enough to get vehicles out of there and straight and efficient. But anything that's being built long-term would have to be built to kind of a different standard than we typically think of. Sometimes with roads, we're kind of like thinking in terms of tangents and turns. If you can just go straight, shorter road, less material to maintain. In the parks, particularly for roads that are being considered and any day probably will be on the National Register of Historic Places, they have a much higher bar about how those have to be built. In fact, our park historian just delivered us a draft document where he went back and looked. There's actually a fairly well-described history of some of the early Alaska Road Commission folks that were working there in the early 1920s and 1930s. The park road started being built in 1922, and they wanted to go out there and put in these nice, efficient, straight roads. Well, landscape architects have always have had prominent roles in the National Park Service, and there was a prominent one back then by the name of Thomas Vint, and V-I-N-T, and he came through the area and really helped take control and convince upper-level park management all the way to the director of the National Park Service back then that we had to create these nice, curvy roads that are aesthetically pleasing, provide nice vistas, and are enjoyable to drive, because they were still thinking in terms of driving the park road back then. And so we would be looking for that nice, curvy, pleasant road, trying to give those vistas. But they might be quite different vistas, however. So, yes. All right, well, maybe we'll wrap up with that. If you'd like to talk a little bit afterwards, feel free to come on up and say hi. Thank you, everyone.